Buckingham Palace is the most photographed building on Earth, but millions of tourists standing at these gates have no idea they're looking at a site of a century-old haunting. While the world watches the changing of the guard, something else, something that died long ago, is still walking the halls of the royal bedrooms. From a monk bound by a tragic secret to a restless major who met a grim end in his office, we're going behind the limestone facade to find the ghosts the monarchy can't evict. Long before the palace doors first opened, this ground was a treacherous marshy wasteland, fed by the river Tyburn. That same river still flows today, trapped in a dark, silent tunnel directly beneath the palace floors. It is a cold, moving witness to the secrets buried here. In the late 1300s, this damp earth was home to a tiny, forgotten village called Cross. Living among its ruins was a woman named Margarie Gourdemaine, known to locals as the Witch of Eye. For years, she lived on the fringes of society as a healer and midwife, brewing ancient remedies from the plants of the marsh. At first, her landlords, the monks of Westminster Abbey, turned a blind eye to her work. But in the 1420s, the air changed. The church began a brutal hunt for anyone practicing the old ways, and Margarie was swept into a web of dark magic and high-stakes treason. She was hired by the Duchess of Gloucester to craft love spells, and more dangerously, to use sorcery to bring about the death of the young King Henry VI. The king's men eventually hunted her down. Margarie was dragged from the marsh and locked away in the freezing stone cells of the Tower of London. On October 27, 1441, she was bound to a stake and burned alive. While some records point to Smithfield Market, local legend insists she was brought back here to be executed on the very ground where Buckingham Palace stands today. They say her death left a dark mark on the land, a stain that centuries of royal opulence couldn't wash away. But Margarie's spirit was just the first to be tied to this earth. Centuries later, a different kind of ghost would emerge from the shadows of a monastery that once stood right here, a figure known as the Bound Monk. This is the story of the Bound Monk, the oldest and most feared resident of Buckingham Palace. According to ancient church legends, a monk living on these grounds committed a sin so grave it broke his sacred vows. His punishment was medieval and absolute. He was wrapped in heavy iron chains and cast into a stone cell deep beneath the monastery. There, in the suffocating dark, he was left to starve. It's said he went completely mad before the end. His last breaths spent cursing the very ground he was buried in. Today, the monastery is gone, replaced by the opulence of the royal terrace, but the monk remains. Late at night, staff have reported a figure in a tattered brown cowl drifting across the rear terrace. He doesn't just walk, he drags the weight of his torment behind him. The silence of the palace is often shattered by the sound of metallic clinking of iron against stone and a low guttural moaning that seems to vibrate through the walls. Sometimes the sorrow turns to rage. If you catch his eye, the spirit has been known to charge toward the palace gates, shaking his chains in a fit of spectral fury before evaporating into the mist. Other witnesses claim to hear a raspy, paper-thin voice whispering from the shadows, begging, not for mercy, but for a single bite of food. He is most active on Christmas Day, when the halls are empty and the palace sits cold and silent. This isn't just a story for the history books either. It's a presence that reportedly deeply unearths King Charles III. The king is said to have a strong dislike for the restless atmosphere of his administrative home, perhaps knowing that while he sits on the throne, the bound monk still claims the shadows beneath it. While the monk belongs to the ancient past, the palace's second most famous ghost comes from a much more modern and documented tragedy. This is the story of Major John Gwynne. In the early 1900s, Major Gwynne was at the height of his career, serving as the private secretary to King Edward VII. But his life of royal duty shattered when he became entangled in a public and scandalous divorce. In the rigid Edwardian era, this was more than a personal failure, it was a social death sentence. Overnight, the man who walked the halls of power became a pariah, whispered about in the very corridors he once commanded. The shame was more than he could bear. In 1910, Major Gwynne walked into his first-floor office, closed the door, and ended his life with a single shot from his service revolver. But while the Major was gone, the violence of that moment seemed to burn itself into the very fabric of the room. To this day, the office on the first floor is a place the palace staff actively avoid. They describe a heavy, suffocating atmosphere, a feeling of being watched by someone who is deeply unwelcome. The most chilling reports, however, aren't about what people see, but what they hear. On more than one occasion, the silence of the palace has been shattered by the unmistakable crack of a single gunshot echoing from behind the office door. It is followed immediately by the sickening, dull thud of a body hitting the floorboards. Every time terrified staff have rushed to the room, they find the same thing. A door that is locked from the inside, a room that is unnervingly still, and a temperature that has dropped so low it catches in their throats. There is never a body, and never a trace of a struggle, only the lingering echoes of a man trying to escape a shame that has followed him into eternity. But the monk and the major aren't the only ones haunting the corridors of power. Sometimes, the ghosts of Buckingham Palace reveal themselves to the very people tasked with protecting the monarchy's public image. In the early 2000s, Ailsa served as the press secretary to Queen Elizabeth II. She was a woman used to high-pressure situations and logical thinking, not someone prone to flights of fancy. But during one of her many late nights staying at the palace, her logic was shattered. Walking through the dim, silent corridors in the early hours of the morning, Anderson saw a figure standing at the far end of a long hallway. It wasn't a shadow, and it wasn't a member of the night staff. It was a silhouette that seemed to absorb the little light left in the room, a shape that was there but shouldn't have been. For a few heart-stopping seconds, she stood frozen, waiting for the figure to identify itself. But it didn't speak. It didn't move toward her. Instead, it slowly shifted its weight, a silent, deliberate turn that felt like it was finally noticing her presence. In that moment, the professional facade broke. Anderson didn't wait to see its face. She turned and fled, the sound of her own frantic footsteps echoing off the marble floors. Years later, in a rare moment of candor, she admitted to the encounter, describing it as a truly horrifying experience. She never could explain who or what was standing in that corridor, but the encounter left her with a chilling realization. In a palace with 775 rooms, you are never truly alone, even behind locked doors. The shadows of Buckingham Palace grew even longer in 1861, following the death of Prince Albert. Queen Victoria retreated into a life of absolute mourning, dressing in black and shuttering the palace for years. During her long absence, the building became a monument to grief. Hallways went cold, rooms were left to gather dust, and the air itself seemed to thicken with loss. When the Queen finally returned, the staff realized that something else had moved in during the silence. They reported the sound of phantom footsteps in empty galleries and doors that would swing open as if for an invisible guest. Some whispered that Prince Albert had stayed behind, unable to leave the woman who mourned him so deeply. Others believed the palace walls had simply soaked up decades of sorrow, creating a permanent, heavy sense of unease that lingers in certain rooms to this day. Before we conclude the video, how unlucky was this? In 1609, King James I tried to start a giant business on this same land. He wanted to break into the expensive global silk trade by planting a massive orchard of 100,000 mulberry trees to raise silkworms. Unfortunately, the king made a simple mistake and bought the black variety of mulberry trees instead of the white ones. Because silkworms refused to eat black mulberry leaves, the entire project failed, and not a single thread of silk was ever made. Buckingham Palace is more than just a home or an office. It is a living timeline of British history. But as we've seen, that history isn't just written in gold and marble. It's etched into the very soil where the Witch of Eye met her end, and it echoes through the corridors where Major Gwynne drew his final breath. Whether it's the clink of the monk's chains on a cold Christmas night, or the inexplicable silence of the staterooms, these stories remind us that power always leaves a mark, and sometimes those who were wronged or broken by that power refused to truly leave. Behind the iron gates and the changing of the guard, the monarchy continues its ancient traditions. But as the sun sets over the palace gardens and the tourists depart, the modern world fades away. And in the shadows of the 775 rooms, the real residents of Buckingham Palace begin their walk. Because at the heart of London, some secrets aren't meant to be kept in archives. They are meant to be felt in the cold air of a hallway or seen in a fleeting shadow at the end of a corridor. Thank you for joining me for this chapter of Your Spooky Chronicles. If you enjoyed this journey into the hauntings of the royal family, don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the world's most haunted locations. But tell me, if you were offered a night alone in the palace, would you take it? Or are some gates better left closed? Until next time, stay curious and keep watching the shadows.